So we have the UN Secretary General joining us. We have Accenture CEO Julie Sweet. We have SAP CEO Jennifer Morgan here. So they're going to be arriving a little bit later. But you know, with all the content that we have and all the speakers that we have, again, welcome. And I'll hand it, Dan, back over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, team. Thank you. Thank you for hosting us. It's not easy to get a room this size for a good lunch. I'd like now to hand over to my boss, the CEO and Executive Director of the UN Global Compact, Ms. Lisa Kingo. Lisa.
Hello, everyone. Good friends, change makers of the world. It's great to have you here today. And Greg, thank you very much for your welcome and your warm words. It's amazing that today we are launching a major new initiative, the SDG Ambition, with our good friends and partners, SAP and Accenture. And we are very keen to share that with all of you during the lunch. I'm also happy that several local networks of the UN Global Compact are present because you will be the main actors, the main drivers of the SDG ambition. So, I mean, take the opportunity to enjoy a nice lunch and relax a little bit before you go back to the madness of Davos this week. We are so delighted to have all of you here today. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Lisa. So to help us understand the need for increased ambition around the SDGs, we're going to start off by hearing some leaders who are already driving the Sustainable Development Goals. And first, I'd like to introduce you to a man with many titles, probably more titles than Sustainable Development Goals, but for us, the Vice Chair of the Board of the UN Global Compact, Paul Polman. Thank you.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. And obviously, first of all, thanks to Accenture for making this venue available. But more importantly, for what you're doing with the UN, because with the Global Compact, you've been involved in many of the reports that we issue, creating the awareness of what is happening out there. And today you do it again with the scaling for the Decade of Ambition. So I applaud you for that. I also see SAP here. We had a wonderful event yesterday. So it's partnerships like that that we need at the UN to move it forward. And what an important decade it is. I don't have to talk to you about 2020. The year that we're going to have the Kunming COP15 on biodiversity. Finally, people start to understand that we have to take care of Mother Nature as well as we want to attack some of the other issues, probably affecting all of the Sustainable Development Goals, if you ask me. And then we have the COP26, where countries need to come in with higher ambitions. In Glasgow, we have the Oceans Conference. Peter is here. And then we also have, obviously, the Secretary General Summit. And in each of these events that we have, and the IUCN in Paris, in France, in Marseille, I would mention as well, but in each of these events, we just have to show that we're not only making progress on where we are, but that we're actually accelerating. And that is the year of delivery, if you want to call it that way. We won't solve all the problems in 2020, but just like we did between the Secretary General Summit in September, the COP25 in Chile, and where we are now at the WEF, we continuously show that in all these indicators that we need to drive to make this a better place for all, that we're actually making progress. I don't have to tell you that the two biggest issues are climate change and inequality, and glad to see now that in many more discussions, people understand that climate change, the role that the oceans play in that, but also what it does to the oceans, and the role that the general biodiversity plays in that. And that's now an integral part. We cannot achieve the Sustainable Development Goals if we don't attack this with a sense of urgency that is probably higher than anybody realizes. I sense a little bit in Davos a lot of the good news, announcements being made that the 1 trillion trees, or Microsoft capturing the previous carbon emissions, or the WEF requiring all of their members to be carbon neutral and sign up to the 1.5 degrees. But these are announcements. There's still a lot of say-do gaps. And frankly, you're in a little bit of a selective group of people here in Davos, self-selected, may I say, that don't yet fully reflect what's happening in the whole world out there. So don't be mistaken that although I feel more positive than what I felt at previous WEFs at this point in time, bigger and bolder commitments than I've seen before. We still have our work cut out for us. And don't underestimate that as we make progress and we start to advance these transitions, that you also will get some unexpected things or forces that go against you. One of them is obviously the geopolitical environment right now in the world that is actually not very conducive. We're getting to a situation that the private sector and many others, certainly civil society as well, are running ahead of what the governments in this world are actually able to deliver. And that puts more onus on us and more requirements to deliver. As you will see from this report, which is a very important report, that when it comes to the SDGs itself, we're on the trajectory to only deliver the SDGs in 2071. If you read the report, poverty alleviation will only be in the year 2002. Climate change is still projected to be about 3.5 degrees. So these are major issues and major challenges that need to be attacked at scale. I'm confident that more and more CEOs start to understand what needs to happen. I'm confident that they're moving in the right direction. But what is not happening, that they really have internalized what it actually means that they need to do at that speed and scale, and that's what we need to focus on. The Global Compact has done a tremendous job in aligning companies around some of their key initiatives, not least to get 199 companies now with the science-based targets getting to the 1.5 degrees. That's a tremendous movement of companies that are committed. If you haven't signed up yet, really sign up for that. And then the other commitments are obviously around the overall implementation of the SDGs, gender, poverty, inequality. These are the areas we need to focus on as a priority as we bring the Sustainable Development Goals to life. And obviously the initiatives on water and oceans fit perfectly under that as well. I don't want to take too much more time, but at the end of the day, I've always come to the conclusion a little bit, you know, we divide the world into north, south, rich, poor, and all that. And increasingly, I've come to the conclusion that the real divide that we have in this society is between the people that understand the crisis and have the courage to act, and those that will be continued to be held back by a lack of courage or timidity to address these issues. And that's the divide that we need to bridge. Obviously, we need all of us from all parts of society to put our full weight behind that. Now, that takes courage. If you look at the definition in your dictionary of courage, is to do things that frighten you. So it's not anymore enough to just be slightly uncomfortable. I think what we really are up to, you need to feel beyond that level of uncomfortableness. And by the way, uncomfortable, I just saw it was a very, very actually dangerous word, because then I thought, oh man, that's the UN. And then it says the UN is comfortable, which would be really, you know, we know that there are in some parts of the UN some comfortable parts, but I want us all to feel the uncomfortable that we need, and a little bit frightened as we move this forward, and obviously deliver what we set out to deliver, which is the Sustainable Development Goals, irreversibly eradicate poverty by 2030, totally doable, and keep this world at 1.5 degrees, not more, and do a favor to all these people that aren't here, and the many people, increasingly more, that are dying as a result of our incapabilities to act. Thank you for what you're doing. Thank you for being here. Thanks to Accenture, and obviously thanks to Lise to lead this wonderful organization, the UN Global Compact. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Please don't feel uncomfortable about eating. This is a lunch, and there is food in front of you. The program will go on, so please feel free to eat. There'll be a main course coming in a bit, so please don't stop doing that. Our next speaker is the CEO of Signify, Mr. Eric Rondelat. Please come and address us. Thank you, sir.
Thanks a lot. So I was asked to talk to you about how we live the SDGs at Signify and the type of ambition that we set for the company. So I'm sorry I'm going to be a bit centered on what we do. And you will have to choose whether you believe that this is an example that can be followed. Basically, at Signify, we define a sustainability program every 5 years. And the ongoing program is just finishing in 2020. So 5 years ago, we had to define ambitious targets, 6 of them, and we didn't want sustainability to stay aside of what the company does, so the sustainability targets were totally integrated in the strategy of the company. At the same time, we didn't want to be only relying on what we were thinking ourselves, so we tried to find, an external benchmark, an external scale. So we used the SDGs. But we were a bit overwhelmed because 17 is a lot. And we could intellectually justify the fact that we do participate to the 17 of them, but we decided to select 4. And on those 4, we communicated both internally and externally. And I think that's extremely important, which is that our people in the company are linking our strategy to our sustainability objective and to the SDGs. And we prefer to talk about 4 of them and concentrate and focus and communicate. We also communicate externally, so if you read our annual report, you will find it. But more than that, every quarter, we are communicating on the 6 objectives that we have from a sustainability standpoint, and this is audited by our auditors. The SDGs that we selected were about sustainable cities, were about clean energy, because we're developing a lot of offers in solar and hybrid lighting. It was about responsible consumption, because we have developed 3D offers and circularity business models. And the last but not the least, about climate actions. And 8 years ago, we made the commitment that the company would be carbon neutral at the end of 2020. And we are on track to be carbon neutral at the end of this year. So I was yesterday talking with other people here in Davos, and they told me, oh, you have been very quick. We said, no, we were not very quick, but we were early, because it does take time. But this is a commitment that we're going to hold for 2020. Now, moving on, our sustainability program are lasting for 5 years, so this one is finishing at the end of 2020. So we're going to be revealing, I cannot tell you a lot, because my communication people and my head of sustainability told me not to talk too much about it, but we're going to be revealing our new sustainability program. It's going to be during the year. It's going to be really ambitious in terms of target, and we have decided to add 2 SDGs to give more of a societal impact and flavor to what we are doing, with bold ambitions, because we believe that in the next program, until 2025, we're going to double our contribution to the SDGs. So I thank you for your attention.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for those inspiring words and a commitment. That's what we're needing, more ambition and commitment. I'd like to ask Mr. Fani Titi, from the CEO of Investec, to come and address us now. Thank you. You're one of the CEOs who signed up to the Global Investors for Sustainable Development Alliance as well. So thank you for that commitment too. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I come from the southern tip of Africa. I come from South Africa. So when we talk about the SDGs, we live in the part of the world where the impact can be seen on a day-to-day basis. As an example, this week, the people from my hometown in the central part of the Free State have been in a state of political rioting because they haven't had clean water for a period of 6 months. Similarly, in the northern part of the country, there hasn't been any level of schooling because the quality of education that has been provided by the government has been deemed to be inferior, unacceptable, and communities have risen up to protest against such. So when you talk about the Sustainable Development Goals, it really does affect the state of the world and the livelihoods of millions and billions of people. So from the southern tip of Africa, we carry a sense of urgency about the implementation of the SDGs. In the eastern part of the country, we've had a severe drought for the last 6-8 months or so. It's the most severe we've heard in that part of the country in living memory. So the impacts of global warming are here today, not only in the future. So when Investec signed up, as it were, to be a participant in the Global Investors for Sustainable Development, it was with an acute sense of the scale of the problem and the impacts that we suffer on a day-to-day basis. As both Paul and Eric have indicated, a lot of work has been done around the SDGs. There's a lot of definitional work that has been done. There's a lot that the UN Global Compact has done to bring to the attention of corporates as to what our role could be in achieving the SDGs. In our part of the world, it is clear that for us to make enough progress, there is a level of collaboration and cooperation that is required. As an example, Investec as a bank has a very substantial program of investment in renewable energy, not only investing our own money, but also bringing in our clients and also bringing in international capital to finance renewable energy. But there has been a level of constriction in the progress we can make because policymakers have not seized the opportunity to create an environment that allows us to move forward. So for us, we see the need for a greater degree of collaboration between the private sectors, between government, and obviously civil society as well. Because if we do not get to cooperate and collaborate, each of the sectors will be able to make some progress, but the collective impact will be short of what we could achieve if we started to collaborate. So in South Africa, we concentrate on the alleviation of inequality. You will know that South Africa is one of the most unequal societies in the world. We concentrate on education, making sure that we can provide quality education to poorer communities, in particular, the access to quality mathematics education. Because without mathematics education, the country is unlikely to make progress in areas of technology, in areas of engineering, which skill sets the country requires particularly severely. So as we sit here this afternoon, from our perspective, we want to encourage corporates to bring the access that they have to capital, to bring the enormous, deep and wide pools of skill to bear on the problem, but also to bring a level of innovation that can help in the achievement of the SDGs. As an example, the advancement of technology in renewable energy, in particular solar energy, and the plummeting prices of solar energy means that if adopted at scale, we could make a significant impact in shifting away and transitioning away from coal. South Africa depends to the extent of 95% of its energy on coal. How do we transition away from coal in the shortest time possible? So the technologies that are available to countries like South Africa or the African continent or some parts of, say, Latin America or some Asian countries that are still at the same level of poverty as South Africa and other African continents, those technologies are particularly important. So Investec as a bank plays an interlocutory role, looking to bring in supply of capital into the areas that could make a difference to the SDGs, but we also try to support our clients in the development space. As an example, I spoke about renewable energy. We help our clients to have the capital that they need to develop. In fact, what we also do is we buy a number of these projects that have been developed, package them into paper that institutional investors can buy. That way we try to use the forces of the market to get capital to move from those who have huge savings, creating a market mechanism to channel that capital back to projects. I think the speakers have indicated that the problems are quite large, and the time frame we have to achieve the goals is quite restricted. So what is important is getting scale, and is getting a level of execution that is unprecedented. That's why from where we stand, we believe that commitment from leadership, both in the government sectors and in the corporate sectors. And in this particular case, I talk specifically about the corporate sector, the commitment to make a difference and the courage to commit resources and to have a scale of execution that can make a difference is what we are here about. In about 5-6 weeks or so, Investec and the JSC in South Africa will be hosting 30 CEOs who form the global investors in sustainable development. Our teams have been working since October when the alliance was launched. We are now going to be reviewing plans because what is important over the next 10 years or so is an ability to deliver and execute at a scale that is much higher. So in 5-6 weeks' time, we will be meeting to review plans. As the Secretary General said at the time we launched the GISD, this is not about another policy document. This is not about another talk shop. We have to come up with implementable strategies that can significantly increase the level of delivery. The achievement of the goals are absolutely critical for the creation of a better world. And we are quite privileged to have a part to play as Investec, as the GISD, and as Africa in the achievement of the SDGs. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you. So thank you very much. We've heard from 3 inspirational leaders who are driving this ambition already and inspiring us to do more. We're going to have a little bit of lunch now. We'd like you in your tables to have a conversation about ambition. What does ambition mean? What can we do to align our strategies, our core strategies with the SDGs and the role that technology can play. So I ask you to have some lunch, have a conversation, and when the Secretary General arrives, we will renew the program. Thank you.
Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. In a few moments, it's my great honor and pleasure to invite His Excellencies, the United Nations Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, to address us. But first, I would like to say a few words to you, Secretary General, on behalf of what I think we can say is a good representation of the companies in the UN Global Compact. We are very proud of your leadership in setting the agenda for the world, in how to curb the sustainable development challenge that we are all finding ourselves in. Your coining of the decade of action has created direction, it has created optimism throughout the entire business community, and your priorities on really making progress on the goals, making the needle move, focusing, of course, on the 2 big gaps, climate and gender, is a huge inspiration and a great direction. So, Secretary General, today we are launching an SDG ambition, mobilizing all our local networks across the world to make the needle move behind the goals. We do it in a great partnership with SAP, with Accenture, that we will hear about in a moment. But now it gives me great pleasure to invite the Secretary General to the podium. Please give him a very warm welcome.
Dear friends, it's an enormous pleasure to be with all of you here today. I think that if multilateralism is to survive, and it's not an easy job to do it, it needs to change. And one of the ways in which it needs to change is to become inclusive, multilateralism itself. Not only the development we want sustainable and inclusive, but multilateralism itself must be inclusive. One of the problems we still have is that governments tend to try to monopolize multilateralism and try to make sure that intergovernmental organizations stay like that. I'm a true believer that today governments decide less and less of what is important in today's world. More and more decisions are taken, even in the political sphere, by cities, by regions, by other layers of government. And more and more, what really matters depends on how the real economy behaves, depends on the decisions of many business leaders, and depends on the ways the civil society organizes itself. And we have seen depends also more and more on the expression of the people, of the youth, in forms that governments show more and more difficulties to control all over the world. So it's very interesting. As governments become weaker, they're trying to increase the grip on multilateral organizations, and it's our duty to make sure that we move in the direction of having a UN that is more and more inclusive, and in which the business community, the civil society, the young people, and all the other key actors have a voice, local power have a voice. And this is a fight that is going to be tough, but it's a fight I'm ready to engage in. And in this, the Global Compact has an absolutely key role, because the Global Compact represents those that in the world spontaneously, assuming their role as business leaders, want to do it in line with the values that the United Nations represent. And understand that to be a business leader is not only to be a business leader, is to be a leader in the society, and being a leader in the society, a leader in name of a number of essential values. And the present moment is a decisive moment. We are in a kind of make it or break it year, 2020. It's true for climate change, but it's also true for the perspectives of sustainable development and, in principle, the sustainable development goals. I must tell you that 1 year ago I was very pessimistic. I was seeing that we were lagging behind in both the implementation of the goals and in relation to climate change. I know that we are still lagging behind, but I see a lot of movement. And I see a lot of movement in society. I see more and more business leaders in the industrial sector, in the financial sector, in all the different areas of activity. I see more and more the civil society, and I see the general public, young people, and cities and regions very clearly putting pressure on their governments in order for governments to assume their responsibilities. Because where we have the problem today in relation to climate change, but also in relation to the implementation of the Agenda 2030, is in the lack of sufficient political will at government level. And so the first message I wanted to give to you is that don't shy on just doing your job. You need to put pressure on the governments of your countries for them to assume the Sustainable Development Goals as a framework for the definition of the development strategy and priorities of the government itself. A few governments are doing it, others are saying they are doing it, but there are still many for which this is just a matter of paying lip service. So it is absolutely essential that the business community assumes a leading role, not only in what you do, but in what you ask your governments to do. Because if they do it, they will also facilitate your job. I mean, it's very different to invest if you have a regulatory framework and a financial framework that is favorable to the kind of investments that the Decade for Action needs. It's very different to have it in this context or to have regulations, policies, tax systems that are against our objectives. If a country goes on increasing subsidies to fossil fuels, not putting a price on carbon, and penalizing many areas of activity to serve some lobbies or to pay tribute to some interests or because of corruption, it makes your life as conscient business leaders much more difficult. But then you have also a very important role as business leaders, mobilizing the private sector as a whole in the countries where you operate in order to assume also the Sustainable Development Goals as a reference in the way they plan their own businesses and they plan their own integration in the communities where they operate. And that leading by example will be very important, and it is the raison d'etre of the Global Compact in itself. Now, we are still lagging behind, clearly lagging behind in climate change. Emissions have went on growing in 2019. We see a list of new power plants based on coal, quite substantial in several areas, especially in Asia, East Asia, Southeast Asia, and South Asia. Subsidies to fossil fuels have increased last year. We see a lot of reluctance to put a price on carbon. I think I've been trying to convince many governments that if you put a tax on carbon and reduce the taxes on income, both for people and for corporations, if those reductions can serve the improvement of living conditions, to make work cheaper and create more jobs and to allow for investments. I mean, this is a win-win situation. But I see resistance, I see difficulties. So a lot needs to be done, and I think your role in asking governments to adopt the adequate regulatory frameworks, the adequate fiscal policies, and the adequate strategies will be very, very important. But we are not yet there, but there is a growing movement. And I see a lot of enthusiasm in business leaders and in the financial sector, even if we had a few interventions here in Davos that were not very inspiring, but others were indeed very inspiring. And I saw, as you know, we launched a group, an alliance of investors for sustainable development with 30 CEOs representing a meaningful number of trillions of dollars of assets. And it was clear from their perspective, first of all, that their portfolios are still consistent with an increase of temperature of 3 to 4 degrees, but a strong commitment to progressively move those portfolios into a green economy. And I think that those that manage assets, and if those assets are linked to the grey economy, they must be convinced that in 20 years' time, or even less, those assets will not have much value. So if you have something that has not much value in the future, probably better to sell it in the present. And that is what I'm trying to convince more and more of these asset managers, is to shift more rapidly those portfolios than they were planning to do so. On the other hand, it is also clear for me that to have societies that are inclusive, that to have societies in which middle class enlarges instead of being squeezed, as we see in several countries of the world, is the way to create conditions both for investments to be more profitable, for business to be more attractive, but also for societies to be more cohesive and for stability to exist. If you look at a country like Chile, probably nobody could imagine that this thing would happen. But if one looks at what happens in Chile, is that independently of an enormous progress the country has witnessed, the middle class was being squeezed. And this squeeze of the middle class and the increase of inequalities in the country generated, starting by some students that were protesting because of an increase in the fees of the underground, it generated a massive movement. We don't want societies like this. We want societies that are inclusive and in which people are able to feel that they have a say from the political point of view, but also that the economy also benefits them. And that is where your role in the Decade for Action is absolutely essential. We need to catch up. If we go on as we are moving in the present direction, we will reach 2030 halfway in relation to the Sustainable Development Goals. So we need ambition, acceleration, investment, action, and pressure over those that take decisions to create the adequate frameworks for your work to be more effective. We count on you, and we hope that at country level you will be working very, very actively with our country teams and with pushing the governments to move in the right direction, and that at global level you'll be a very strong voice in advocacy for the kind of work that you are doing, that is, first of all, a work based on principles, and second, a work aiming at a development that is inclusive and sustainable, and a globalization that is fair and understood by all as a benefit to humankind. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Secretary General. Thank you for joining us. And now, as we officially launch the SDG Ambition, I'd like to ask the three partners to come up to the stage. Lisa Kingo, the Executive Director and CEO of UN Global Compact, Julie Sweet, the CEO of Accenture, and Jennifer Morgan, the co-CEO of SAP. Thank you for joining us. Lisa, why don't you get us underway?
Well, thank you so much. Secretary General, thank you for wonderful remarks. We could not have asked for a better backdrop for launching the SDG Ambition. We will give you a little bit more details of what it is, but I do want to take the opportunity to just make you aware that this is probably the only panel in Davos with strong women that are making important decisions for the future of the world. And oh, thank you. So we have come together as partners, SAP, Accenture, the UN Global Compact, to take action, to kick off this decade of action in January. It is also the 20-year anniversary of the UN Global Compact and the 75-year anniversary of the UN. So we have a lot to celebrate, but we also need to make sure that we have some progress to celebrate. And that's what we are launching today. So we want together to create a new normal for what is expected from businesses that want to run their companies in a responsible, sustainable way. So the SDG Ambition will do two things. It will challenge and support more than 1,000 companies across the world within the next 2 years through all our local networks in doing two things. Becoming more ambitious. We must see the needle move behind the goals. And integrating the UN principles and the goals much deeper into the entire business operations. That's where the nice little brochure that is on your table comes into the picture, because we have developed a very simple implementation framework for the goals and the principles that talks about how a company can integrate principles and goals in strategy, in operations, and in all stakeholder engagements. We do not want any companies being in doubt how to do this. We want to eliminate that question because the answer is here. It's very simple. It's based on all the good practice that many global compact companies have developed over the years, plus the insights, of course, of our two partners. So we are very excited about really utilizing the whole UN Global Compact organization with the UN organization in a very different way and in partnership with two global organizations that are very, very strong across the world as well. So I want to thank both Julie, I want to thank Jennifer for coming together with us in a partnership that we hope the entire business community can benefit from. It is a partnership to make this project a reality, but it is also an amazing business accelerator to make responsible business the new normal and mainstream across the global business opportunity. And let me emphasize, it's not only for the big companies, it's for every company. And when you get the chance to dive a little bit into our implementation framework, you will notice that it's just as relevant for a small company anywhere in the world as for enormous, large organizations like the ones represented here on the board. So there's no excuse anymore. Here is the recipe. Let's set some ambitious goals, 1.5 for climate, for example, and show that we can make the needle move and we can make the coming generations proud of how we are trying to address the challenges. And with these words, I'm very proud to hand over to Jennifer to talk a little bit about the SDG ambition from your perspective.
Thank you so much. And Julie, thank you. Thank you. And Julie, thank you for hosting us here in your beautiful space. You know, as I've been reflecting over these last few days and to comment on the Secretary General's remarks around, it really will take the world coming together. It's no good if Europe, goes full scale and focusing on these issues when Asia doesn't, right? And so the concept of the world coming together has to be something that we have to leave Davos with and bring to a practical execution. How do we do it when we leave here? And as you said, we're big companies. And it's important for leaders to put in place and start to think about how do we want to measure this? How do we want to hold ourselves accountable, our company accountable? But the how matters. We all know, most of us know how important this is and the awareness has been created. But leaving here, it's really about how do we do this? And Julie and I are fortunate in that each of our businesses, we're a software company. Julie runs an amazing people and services company. And together, we get to see a lot of the same things, but through slightly different lenses. And one of the things that we do every day is we're focused on businesses and how they run. And so when you think about how technology and new ways of thinking about this, when you come to the how, think about some of the areas where there's opportunity ripe for improvement. When you think about processes in an enterprise, procurement, travel, right, which is a corporate function. You think about manufacturing. You think about supply chains, the packaging, warehousing, travel, logistics. This is what we spend a lot of time on in terms of building software and helping our customers run their enterprises really effectively. If you think about, all right, how can you take a lot of what companies already have in place today, right, a lot of these systems that manage the processes, and overlay the sustainability aspect of this and think about, okay, companies have a financial ledger today, right? They track their financials. They can look at it from different perspectives. There's no reason you can't have a carbon ledger, right? Or other elements of sustainability. So not only can you start to measure it, but you can actually use the processes across the enterprise to drive a different way of doing things, to drive a different level of awareness. And guess what? Those processes touch every single person in the company. So when Julie and I talk about this and have been thinking about this together, it's a matter of course, we want to focus on our own companies and how we make ourselves better and create the awareness within our own companies. But we have this unbelievable privilege and responsibility for the fact that we do business with hundreds of thousands of companies around the world. And so coming together and helping them and be a multiplier, right, for their own consumers is, I think, one of the big hows that we'll take away from this.
Thank you. It's great to see this packed room, and we feel really privileged to be a part of the SDG Ambition and to be working together. And I do want to recognize Peter Lacey, our Senior Managing Director, who leads all of sustainability, who's also just so passionate and is going to be leading our team, but he's leading us in doing new things. So Jen and I share a friendship. We also share children of the same age, and we were talking about what's relevant to them, because as a mother of two daughters, 11 and 13, I was just sharing that they could care less about sort of what I'm doing most of the time, so I'm always trying to get them excited. And so when I was talking about Davos, I said, well, I'm going to be on this panel with Dr. Jane Goodall. And it was the only thing that excited them. They immediately got on Snapchat. And so one of the things that we're both most excited about going back and talking to our children about is being a part of this, because this is what our children care about, right? Whether it's climate change and poverty and inclusion and diversity. And so I think it's very personal for all of us. So as you walk away today, we want you to remember the 3 A's. Assemble, activate, and achieve. And so the SDG ambition is about assembling what is now a core of CEOs. We have a lot more to go, and we were talking about that earlier, but we have reached scale in terms of commitment. We did research together with UN Global Compact. 71% of CEOs said that with increased commitment and action, businesses can make a difference. We're seeing that here in Davos, in our home country in the US. We had 180 CEOs at the Business Roundtable say it is a false decision between shareholders and stakeholders. Right? We are committed to the purpose of corporations being for all stakeholders. So we are assembling CEOs, we are assembling the best of technology, and we're assembling the best of the UN Global Compact. But it is all about activating the commitment, right? Because that's where we need to go now. And I love the decade of action. And when you think about it in a very simple way, so we always generally say we start with ourselves. Up until including this year, when we report on how we're doing against the goals, we put it in our annual corporate citizenship report. If you just want to understand the essence of what we're trying to do today, starting next year, it will be in our annual report to shareholders, because this is about how we operate our businesses. That's very simply what this is about. And finally, achieve, right? Paul Polman, who's one of the great leaders, former CEO and chairman of Unilever, and is a leader in this long before we had a core, said it best. He said, this is about speed and scale, right? We need to activate, but we have to get to scale. And so I want to sort of leave us with one thought, and I hope you don't mind me being so bold as to say, the decade of action needs an and. It's and shared success. Because that is what this is about. And what we commit is that SAP and Accenture are not going to make this about us. We are open. We want to bring all of our competitors, our friends, every company in this. This is the decade of action and shared success. And I'm so grateful that you're all here to join us. So thank you very much. And thank you for your leadership. This is very exciting. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for joining us for this special launch of SDG Ambition. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you to the Secretary General for joining us. And please enjoy the rest of your dessert. And we'll finish very soon. Thank you.